The call came in at 12:47 a.m., buried beneath layers of static that made it sound older than the radio itself. Dispatch said a Louisiana state trooper had gone silent near mile marker 143 on Highway 61, a stretch of road most officers hated working alone. The highway cut through miles of swamp where the trees leaned inward, and the water sat black and still, hiding whatever lived beneath its surface. Trooper Evan Broussard acknowledged the call, though unease had already settled into his chest. Radios failed out there. People did too. As Evan drove south, the world narrowed to the glow of his headlights and the wet ribbon of asphalt ahead. Fog rolled in low, clinging to the road like breath on cold glass. The air smelled of rotten, stagnant water. In his side mirror, red and blue lights bounced off the trees, making them appear to move, as if the swamp itself were pacing him. He told himself it was just fatigue, just another long shift, but his grip tightened on the steering wheel all the same. Mile marker 143 appeared suddenly, half swallowed by vines and mist. The cruiser sat just beyond it, angled awkwardly on the shoulder. Its lights were still flashing, painting the fog in frantic bursts of color. The driver's door hung open. The engine was running. Evan pulled in behind it and stepped out, his boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. He called out, his voice sounding thin and small as it vanished into the trees. No answer came back. He approached the cruiser slowly. Inside, the radio hissed with a steady, nervous static. A paper coffee cup had tipped over on the dashboard, leaving a dark stain that was still wet. The citation pad lay open on the seat, pen resting where it had been dropped. The last line ended in a jagged scratch, the handwriting breaking off mid-word. Evan swallowed hard. Troopers didn't abandon scenes like this. Not without a reason. The fog thickened as he circled the vehicle. His flashlight beam cut through it in short, useless bursts, revealing nothing but trunks, moss, and shadows that refused to stay still. That was when the radio crackled. Not his, this one. The abandoned cruiser's radio spat out a voice so faint he almost missed it. "Unit 103, do you copy?" Evan froze. He recognized the voice immediately. Trooper Landry, the man who had been assigned this sector. Evan grabbed the mic, his heart hammering. He called Landry's name, demanded his location, asked if he was injured. The reply came after a long pause, the words stretched and distorted. "Still close," the voice said. Don't let it see you." The transmission dissolved into static, followed by a low sound that made Evan's skin crawl. It might have been breathing. It might have been something else entirely. Against every instinct screaming at him to stay on the road, Evan followed the sound into the swamp. Each step off the asphalt felt like crossing a line he wouldn't be able to step back over. The ground softened under his boots, the water seeping in around the soles. He found Landry's hat floating in a patch of still water, the badge clipped neatly inside as if placed there on purpose. Nearby, the mud was scarred by deep, uneven impressions, wide and dragging, circling back toward the road. The flashlight flickered. Darkness pressed in. Evan's radio crackled again, this time alive with voices that overlapped and blurred together. Fragments of old calls, cries for help, names spoken by people long dead. His chest tightened as he realized the impressions in the mud weren't random. They formed a slow loop, a boundary. Something had been taken, and something else had been left behind to warn anyone who came looking. The cruiser's lights suddenly went dark. Silence fell so heavy it hurt his ears. Evan stood frozen, breath fogging the air, listening. Footsteps sounded behind him, wet and deliberate. stopping just close enough that he could feel warmth at his back. He turned, flashlight shaking in his hand, but the beam showed only empty fog and crooked trees. Then a voice spoke beside his ear, clear and calm. The radio call came through just after 2 a.m., slicing through the quiet of the station like a blade. It wasn't routed through dispatch, didn't carry a call sign, and didn't follow protocol. It was simply a voice, strained, urgent, and unmistakably afraid. "State Trooper, please, I need help." Trooper Marcus LeBlanc sat up straighter in his chair, every nerve firing at once. The voice sounded young, male, and close to panic. Before Marcus could respond, the transmission cut to static. Marcus tried to hail dispatch, but they had no record of the call. No active incidents, no officers in distress. Still, the voice lingered in his head, raw and real enough that ignoring it felt wrong. Against procedure, he logged his cruiser out and traced the signal to a back road skirting the edge of the Atchafalaya Basin. It was an area locals avoided at night. Too many dead ends, too much swamp, too much history soaked into the mud. The road was barely visible under his headlights, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt bordered by tall grass and standing water. Fog drifted low, blurring the edges of reality. As Marcus drove deeper, his radio crackled again. "You're close," the voice said, calmer now, almost relieved. "Don't turn around." Marcus asked for a location, a badge number, anything. The reply came softly, distorted. "I already tried that. It didn't help." The signal led him to a clearing where the road ended abruptly, swallowed by trees. Marcus parked and stepped out, the night pressing in on him from all sides. The smell of damp earth and decay hung heavy in the air. His flashlight swept across the ground, catching on something metallic half buried in the mud. A state trooper badge, old, scratched. The name etched into it was unfamiliar, worn down by time. The radio hissed again, closer now. "I never left," the voice whispered. Marcus felt his pulse spike. He demanded to know where the officer was, whether he was injured. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Then the flashlight flickered, and for a split second, Marcus saw movement between the trees. A shape that looked almost human but wrong in its stillness, as if it were waiting to be noticed. Suddenly, the radio came alive with overlapping transmissions. Voices cried out over one another. Officers calling for backup, dispatchers repeating codes, screams abruptly cut short. Marcus clutched the radio, realizing with dawning horror that these weren't live calls. They were echoes. Old distress calls that had never been answered, replaying themselves in the same place they'd first been lost. The fog tightened around him, and the temperature dropped sharply. Marcus backed toward his cruiser, but the clearing seemed to stretch, the distance growing with every step. His radio crackled once more, the original voice now steady, resigned. "It keeps us here," it said. "Every call answered brings another witness." Marcus felt something brush past him, cold and heavy, like water moving against his legs. He spun around, flashlight beam shaking, but saw only fog and the faint outlines of trees. Then he noticed the ground beneath his boots, deep impressions forming slowly in the mud, as if something unseen were circling him, marking the boundary he wasn't meant to cross. He reached his cruiser at last and slammed the door shut, heart pounding. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the fog. As he sped away, the radio screamed with static, then fell silent. When he finally reached cell range, Marcus called dispatch again. They insisted no such call had ever existed. No missing officers, no unresolved incidents in that area. The next morning, Marcus filed a report anyway. It was quietly dismissed, archived under equipment malfunction and fatigue. But weeks later, while reviewing old records out of stubborn curiosity, Marcus found something that made his blood run cold. Decades earlier, a trooper had vanished in the Atchafalaya Basin after reporting strange radio interference and an unseen presence. His final transmission ended mid-sentence. No body was ever recovered. The transport should have been routine. Trooper Daniel Thibodeaux had done it hundreds of times. Pick up a suspect from a small parish jail, drive the long, quiet highway back toward Baton Rouge, paperwork waiting at the end. The man in the back seat was silent, hands cuffed behind him, head lowered so his face stayed hidden in shadow. Arrested for trespassing near an old plantation deep in the bayou. He hadn't resisted, hadn't spoken, hadn't even asked where he was being taken. That alone unsettled Daniel more than any shouting ever could. The night pressed in as Daniel drove, swamp water glimmering faintly beyond the road. Spanish moss swayed in the headlights like slow, moving figures. The radio played low, a country station fading in and out with the signal. Every few miles, Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. The prisoner never moved. He sat unnaturally still, as if breathing were optional. At one point, Daniel caught his own reflection instead and felt a flash of relief he didn't fully understand. Somewhere near a stretch of road locals called Devil's Bend, the temperature inside the cruiser dropped sharply. Daniel rubbed his arms, checking the vents, but the air conditioning wasn't on. A soft sound came from the back seat then, a whisper so faint it barely registered. Daniel asked if the prisoner needed something. No response. When he looked again in the mirror, the man's head was raised slightly, though Daniel could still not see his eyes. The radio crackled without warning. Not dispatch, just static, followed by a brief, distorted phrase that sounded like a name. Daniel's name. He reached to adjust the volume, his pulse quickening. The whisper came again, closer this time, right behind his ear. You shouldn't have stopped there. Daniel slammed the brakes, heart pounding, and spun around with his flashlight trained on the back seat. It was empty. The handcuffs lay neatly on the seat, still locked. No broken restraints, no open doors. The cage between the front and back was intact, bolts tight, metal unmarred. Daniel stepped out into the night, shouting commands that echoed uselessly into the swamp. His boots sank into wet earth as he circled the cruiser, flashlight beams slicing through fog that hadn't been there moments before. There were no footprints, no disturbed brush. It was as if the man had never existed. Daniel called for backup, his voice shaking despite every effort to stay calm. Dispatch acknowledged, but their questions only deepened the fear knotting in his chest. They had no record of a prisoner matching the description. No trespassing arrest, no pickup logged from the parish jail. Daniel insisted he'd signed the transfer papers himself. Dispatch asked him to remain at the scene. While he waited, the radio began to whisper again. Not words exactly, but fragments of sound that felt intentional. Images pressed into Daniel's mind, without permission, a rope hanging from a tree, shallow graves swallowed by mud, men in uniforms long outdated standing silently at the roadside. The fog thickened until the cruiser's lights felt weak and distant, like candles about to be snuffed out. Something shifted behind him. Daniel turned slowly, every muscle screaming. For a split second, he saw a shape in the back seat again, not solid, not fully there, but watching him. Its face seemed to stretch and blur, features rearranging themselves like reflections on water. Then it smiled, and Daniel understood with sickening clarity that the thing had never been a prisoner. It had been riding along, waiting to be acknowledged. Backup arrived to find Daniel crouched beside his cruiser, weapon drawn, eyes wide and unfocused. He was alone. No sign of a second person. The handcuffs were gone. The back seat was empty and cold to the touch. The report that followed was quietly buried, chalked up to stress and exhaustion. Daniel was placed on leave. He resigned weeks later,